The 70th anniversary of the founding of the PRC has been marked by a huge military parade in the center of Beijing. In the past 70 years, China's major economic and social indicators have increased tremendously. Its international status has also been enhanced, and its global influence has grown. So how do we understand these 70 years of change and transformation? What is China's role in global affairs, and how will new technology reshape the future? To talk more about these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Jia Daojun from Peking University and our current affair commentator, Einar Tangen. We'll also be speaking via satellite to Fraser Cameron, director of the EU Asia Center, who is currently in Tokyo. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Li Qiuyuan. All right, so Tuesday, October the 1st, was a big day for China. We've seen the military parade. We've seen a night gala, fireworks marking the day. So for starters, Einar, let me start with you. How would you characterize China's transformation over the past 70 years?
Well, it's different parts. First off, you have liberation, and that's under Mao. Then you have pragmatism and growth, which is under Deng. And now you have challenges, which is under Xi. So 70 years, I think you could cut it up into 3 different eras. They all require different things, but one thing unites them all: planning. China was successfully able to use the kind of 5-year plan that did not work necessarily as well for Russia, but has worked tremendously here. I mean, people always say, oh, I don't know what's going on in China, it's so opaque. I said, well, can you read? And they said, yes. And I said, well, if you read the 5-year plan, you'll see that it's very complete. You'll know exactly what's going to happen over the next 5 years and what the priorities are. And this has allowed China to expand. Obviously, the reason it's been successful is because they don't stick to one idea. They keep massaging the ideas until they're working, and that has with these free trade zones and things like this.
Starting with pilot zones,
exactly,
pilot ideas,
yes,
and make adjustments. Professor Jia, your thoughts on this?
Well, in addition to what we just said, the power of planning, I would think one of the things that led to the success of the Chinese society and the economy was innovation in the policy sense. Planning was never really meant to be a dictatorial thing. You can adjust along the way. You actually contribute to modification of the planning. You contribute to the shaping up of the next plan, and along the way you can deviate. As we say, you try to feel the stones as you cross the river. I would think some people in a different way call it pragmatism, but I would think in this case it's innovation, and it's a compromise over purposes. You have someone initiating something, and then the larger good may not be as thoroughly debated as in many other societies, but nevertheless people let it have a chance. For instance, if you recall, a little less than 10 years ago, there were many skeptics about China's high-speed rail projects. They had lots of things to say, a lot of predictions. And these are not small projects. It means massive taking of land, a lot of commitment of resources, including human labor. But look, it works. And there are also policy areas where that have not quite worked. But earlier there was reference to challenges. I think one of the challenges that the government under President Xi has taken, which is far-sighted, given the inequality in many other societies that's showing up in political stress. Here in China, we devote a lot of efforts to poverty elimination.
No, I agree with my colleague about this. I mean, it's been tremendous. But, a lot of times when people start talking about this idea of political freedom and looking at the political consequences and debating them, you have to remember that, when Deng took over, China had no foreign reserves to speak of.
Exactly.
All right, there was nothing in the tin pot. All China had was the plan and a huge labor dividend. And they were able to successfully parlay that into being the 2nd largest economy in the world. So this is really a tremendous miracle, and at the same time, still devoting time to socialist core principles and that's fairness in society and things like that.
Let me also bring Fraser into this on the remarkable economic growth that China has witnessed over the past 70 years, like our guest just mentioned, starting from simple manufacturing, mining, textiles, to now emerging as a major economic powerhouse on the global stage. What's your view of all has happened here in China, Fraser?
Well, I think you have got to hand it to the Chinese people. They've showed themselves remarkable at innovation. They all stress the importance of education, top priority for, I think, every family in China. They are able to respond to changes. They actually go out and find new markets. So the party gives direction, but you have to really say the Chinese have shown the remarkable entrepreneurial spirit, which I think is very traditional in Chinese society, and have shown the rest of the world that with good, strong, hard work and good ideas and application and applying the fruits of your education, innovation, you can actually make a real success. So I think China has done a remarkable job, not just in the traditional areas we all talk about, alleviation of poverty, etc., but actually showing how you can actually deal with the challenges of a huge country like China with over 1 billion people and still achieve the cohesion and bring it forward into the 21st century. So it really has been a remarkable journey.
Right, and China has now been focusing on high-tech and advanced manufacturing sectors, right, with a modern industrial system gradually taking shape there. But what does it take for China to move up the value chain, Einar?
Well, it takes innovation and beyond policy. This is, we're talking about technological. I mean, there's a whole new technology sphere that's opening up, whether you're talking about AI or robotics, new materials. All of these are areas where China has potentially, they want to lead. They don't want to be following, they don't want to be copying, they want to have their own IP, and this is falling very much in the way that Huawei has developed 5G and many other areas. We always talk about 5G. Actually, Huawei has been a leader in the core development of systems, the home runs, a lot of the technical areas, and they participated in making the standards for these areas. I mean, this was unheard of 10 years ago that a Chinese company would be putting its resources into making sure that there are uniform standards and participating in these events and symposiums. So China is poised to do that. The question is, how do you get educated workforce there? How do you get the resources focused on that? And a lot of that is going to depend on the universities. Beida, Tsinghua, not only those, but throughout China. These are the places where people have the skill sets to take China to the next level. So you have to put the money, the people, and also the ideas, and put them in close proximity, and hopefully it works.
Do you believe that China can lead in 5G, in AI, sectors like these cutting-edge technologies?
These are cutting-edge technologies where many of us don't quite understand. They're exciting because they attract a lot of venture capital. They become popular topics partly because of possible applications to defense. And but let's not forget, earlier you mentioned mining, agriculture. It was not until about 1994 when more than half of China's export value came from non-raw materials, manufactured things. And those manufactured included textiles, man-made. China used to be heavily reliant for decades on exporting raw materials. We exported rice, for example, when we were very poor in the 50s and 60s, in exchange for machinery, even second-hand machinery from Japan to make fertilizer, or from Western Europe that was willing to supply us. And today we, of course, should try to make AI, make 5G or what next successful. But let's not forget, when in the field of manufacturing is in those areas that are less flashy, for instance, precision machines. For instance, what you said earlier about a lot of standards in petrochemicals, China has a long way to go. The made in China is no longer automatically identified with low quality, but just to scale up and just to improve the even things as bricks for the house, housing construction, make them more durable, make them more weather and heat resistant. You know, and you can save a lot of energy. There's a whole lot of areas to do. Yeah. And here, in terms of education, it's not just schools like Beijing, Tsinghua that are the elite ones. The one area, again going back to what we talked about when we mentioned inequality in many societies, the one area where China really needs a lot more effort to invest in is vocational training, is the training of the frontline workers, the training of the assembly workers. We cannot just simply say, well, let's leave it to the market. The government, the education institutions have to team up with the companies, be they domestic or international. And we have a long way to go.
A long way to go, but when you put it that way a little earlier, China did undergo tremendous transformation over the past 7 decades.
We have a lot to celebrate, that's for sure, but at the same time we must be quite aware of the areas of weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and including, frankly speaking, in the face of some of the challenges in globalization, how we integrate. That takes some planning, actually. The Chinese economy with that of many other countries. You want to keep the global, China needs to be in the global supply chains. We need to be in the global value chains. But at the same time, it's so critically important that we don't, for example, the deployment of robotics, that's controversial worldwide, including here in China, I suppose. We need to create job opportunities for other economies as well, so that they could be in a position to purchase our products so that we could all scale up in some ways.
I think
your thoughts on the major challenges that China is
lower cost manufacturing is moving out to areas where you have cheaper labor. And we already seen this. China, this has nothing to do with the trade wars. This is the simple fact reality. The reason that these companies came to China was for this labor dividend. The reason they're leaving in high labor content businesses like clothing and shoes and things like that is the same reason. So that's not going to change. But when people start talking about AI and 5G and things like that, please remember, these are things that make existing processes more efficient.
Right.
So the amount of value that you're getting from there is basically you're squeezing out a lot of the middlemen, a lot of the processes in between. Now, what you're talking about, new materials, new growing methods and things like this, it is absolutely essential for making a much more balanced society, more energy efficient and things like this. But in the end, we also have to recognize that our basic needs are now only about 20% of GDP in an advanced country. The 80% is all about choice. Whether I buy a video game, whether I go to the movies, out to dinner, all of these things they're not necessary to my life. They bring my life pleasure. But this is exactly where it's going. So when we start talking about the future and where people are going to work, it's probably going to be in these choice areas. It's going to be things about creating things and things like that, less about being on the manufacturing line or driving a car, and more about designing or repairing machines and things like this.
Yeah, I also want to talk about China's space technology and its space ambition, because over the past 70 years, China took some increasingly tough challenges, from the launch of Dongfang Hong-1 satellite to first manned spacecraft, to the Beidou navigation satellite system, to being able to land on the far side of the moon. So, Professor Jia, how do you view China's innovation spirit in space exploration?
Well, let's be frank and honest. For most of these major nations of the world, you make another example would be India. For China, the space program, a lot of it has to do with prestige. It's a project that lifts people's spirits. It gives young people hope that things can be done. But there will come a time when you do look at the actual applications of these technologies, these ideas, these materials. So there is another dimension of this would be weaponization of space or not. That's an issue related to peacemaking. China, the United States, Russia, and major other countries. And these days, we don't get so fascinated with topics like Star Wars, but nevertheless...
You're not Ronald Reagan.
Exactly. We're past that age, but nevertheless, the concern is still there. Earlier you mentioned Beidou and others. We have GPS, we have other navigating systems out of Russia and whatnot. And there is a need for a global coordination to make these choices easier, to actually have these technologies, these investments serve the real purpose of improving efficiency for as many people as possible around the world. After all, you put a Beidou system up there in space. You want people to make use of that as much as possible. And that's where the area where we need more work. The work probably is more on the ground rather than sending a lot more satellites into space that need to be.
Fraser, what are your thoughts on this? Because next year China will embark on new missions such as exploring Mars. What's your expectation for future space missions for China and also the reach of China's space program?
Well, I think, it has to be limited. There's obviously a certain prestige factor in being able to do this, but the economic benefits are not always apparent. So I think, you have to obviously be in the space race as a great power. But again, I would not exaggerate the economic benefits to be obtained from this. I think it's not proven so far as to what you're going to get out of it.
Europe used to be fascinated with this Galileo project. And slowly, the European societies probably matured themselves a little bit. They were less obsessed with it.
No, the cost made them less.
The cost, that's right.
All right, now we're going to talk about diplomacy 70 years on. Let's start with the trickiest relations, China-U.S. ties. Is the collision with the United States inevitable? Your thoughts?
It's a question that has been asked too many times, frankly speaking, to be meaningful. I would put it this way. China and the United States has a very long history of interactions, but the past 40 years have been the most substantial in terms of societal level interactions. China benefited greatly from projects with the United States, including many of those that were supported or endorsed by both governments. Currently, this talk and in many ways action of decoupling between the two societies is not very helpful. What we do need to do is to actually stop, to rescue ourselves from somehow this imagination saying the two societies are too closely woven together that these linkages might someday become a geopolitical leverage against each other. That sentiment is...
You don't agree with it?
I don't go with that. And that sentiment leads to the preparation for the clash. If anything, I would say that the level of interaction between the two societies is probably too thin. You correct me if I'm wrong. If you look at the total amount of U.S. investment in China, it's actually less than 2% of total U.S. investment abroad. Given the size of the population, given the potential to sell made in America markets, or just to make here in China and sell in China. We certainly deserve a lot more in terms of market potential.
Yeah, but you have to remember that the model that we used in America was to have subsidiary companies making the parts and then assembling and then sending them back. There wasn't as much things. The direct investment, like when Buick came in, they didn't ship in a new car line. They took apart an existing car line that they were going to abandon, sent it to China, and they started it up. So it's a different thing. I agree with you, and I from an optimistic point of view, I hope you're right. But I see really the issue here is emotion. Right now, you have a tremendous amount of emotion in the U.S. People in the middle class are upset because their numbers are down. Their real buying power over the last 30 years has gone down. Yet corporate profits are up. So they're looking for a scapegoat, and unfortunately, people in power are pointing towards China. China stole your jobs. China is evil. They steal your IP. This is nonsense. I keep asking people, show me somebody who took substantial IP, and don't talk about Tappy the robot. Okay, they were simply trying to sell phones. Was it wrong? Yes. Don't show me somebody who was trying to line their own pockets as an agent of China. Okay, these are separate interests. There's all sorts of industrial espionage going on, including by the U.S., and there's multi-million, billion-dollar worth of suits in the U.S. things. So what you really have here is a situation where emotionally the U.S. is feeling under threat, and they're looking for a scapegoat. At least the elites are.
We need to guard against a rival of similar sentiment here in China too. The average life expectancy of China at birth is about, as I heard, if I'm not wrong, I hope I'm not wrong,
77, I guess?
77 or
Yeah.
something. That's a big improvement, but far from society like Japan or the United States. You mentioned about this apprehension in the U.S. It's really that age group of male who are aged between 49 and 69 or 60, who, when they lose a job, it's very difficult to get retrained, get a new permanent job, and many of them would be the only head of the household that makes the income. As many of these so-called lower skilled jobs leave China, we may be accumulating a larger and larger group of that population as well. Our society is also rapidly aging.
You know, you already have that in Dongbei. I mean,
Right.
you went through your own Rust Belt period,
Exactly.
and they're trying to rejuvenate these areas. These
Right.
are just part of the kind of economic cycles that affect industrialized societies. The question is, how do you deal with them?
Right.
In the U.S., we basically ignored them. People just stayed put, waiting for the government to give them jobs. Whereas in China, they created plans and said, look, this is how we're going to handle the situation. We're going to either move people out or we're going to move industries in. But you don't have that kind of flexibility when you're in the U.S. or Britain or other places.
And Fraser, how do you see this? What kind of coexistence do you foresee between China and the United States?
Well, I think you have to distinguish between the rhetoric of the Trump administration and what is actually happening in terms of the global supply chains in which China is involved in, the vast increase in people-to-people exchanges at all levels, from university to films and theatre, everything. I mean, it's a huge difference in the last 25 years, and this cannot be reversed overnight or in the course of one administration. The fact is that China, the United States and Europe are really all intertwined now. So I say you've really got to sort out the rhetoric here, the blame game, if you like, from the reality. And business knows that China is a booming market. Chinese know that they have to invest and trade with Europe and the United States, and that's not going to change.
And the EU will in 2020 mark 45 years of engagement with China. Throughout the years, Fraser, how would you characterize the relationship? More of partners or competitors?
It's a bit of both, but we have the same kind of relationship with the United States. We're a partner in some areas, and we're competitors also. And we sometimes are more in tune with China when it comes to issues like, you know, climate change, the Iran nuclear deal, or support for multilateral institutions than we are with the United States. And we used to be more in tune with the United States on issues like human rights and democracy, but you've never heard Trump mention these words since he came into office. So it's a bit of a confused situation now, and I think the bottom line for all three major actors is that they have to really work out what their own interests are, try and see what the interests of the other sides are, and achieve the best possible partnership. That's the sane way to proceed with this relationship.
Yeah, Fraser, I generally agree with you. I'm going to disagree with you on this point. This is not about three powers dividing up the world. That would be exactly the wrong thing. We've seen this happen before. Really, there has to be mutual respect for the different countries. South America is not going to be happy. Africa is not going to be happy. Middle East is not going to be happy. The rest of Asia is not going to be happy if you just have three powers trying to figure out what their relationship is, and the heck with everybody else. I mean, really what we're looking for, and what I think Fraser was talking about, is people are looking forward to the post-Trump world. What will it be at? Unfortunately, I can't say that it's going to be that much better. I don't know how you see this, but you know, the Republican Party is going to be what after Trump? They basically gave up all of their deals. You know, the deficits are running out of control. The states' rights have been ignored. I mean, all of the things that have been traditionally there, the decency, you know, holding back cohesiveness, not criticizing other. This is all out the window. So when he leaves, what happens to the party that was 90% behind him just a few months ago? So you're going to have a major, some sort of realignment there. The Democrats have already indicated that they like the tough on China approach. Whether that's rhetoric or reality, it's doubtful that they're going to retreat from it initially. But if there's a post-Trump world, I think, and a Democrat comes in, they're going to spend most of their time trying to figure out how to repair the damage they perceive that he did. And that will give China a certain amount of breathing room to figure out where it wants to go and how to establish relations not only with the EU, but also with the Belt and Road Initiative, ASEAN, South America, and Africa.
Your reaction?
Well, hopefully we are seeing already the tip of the climax of an American foreign policy that's probably characterized the American way or no way. It's a little bit of that.
Make America great again.
It's also, you know, I'm hopeful in the sense that the United States is a country that does a lot of introspection, and there will be a lot of learning and self-correction. But like it or not, we may have to be putting up with the current way of doing things for a couple more years, because at the end of the day, politics is about the flow of money, and it's local to begin with, and the United States economy is in a uniquely strong position, not just an independent economy, but system-wide.
Even with this latest thing where you've had the lowest
employment rate.
No. The lowest
unemployment.
No. Manufacturing went down for the second month in a row. They haven't seen numbers like this since 2009.
Right.
We put 4 more months like that together, we have an official recession. I don't know that Donald Trump will last if that happens.
Well, hopefully not, but the U.S., given the role of the U.S. dollar, it can do a lot of things worldwide. And in this case, speaking about China and EU and whatnot, there is a lot China can learn from the EU by working with the EU. EU has been peculiarly strong in terms of setting the norms and standards for others, including technical standards and a lot of policy issues. A real dream world, as we look into the future, would be a Chinese paying more attention to the EU way of doing things in terms of setting norms and standards, and Europeans and Americans coming to appreciate the Chinese, should we say, can-do spirit. Let's do it one thing at a time, project by project, rather than saying we need a wholesale change. And hopefully America can be a little gentler in terms of emanating this so-called my way or no way.
I love your emphasis on the rational, the logical, but I still think that people are very afraid. They're defensive, and you're starting to see this in the breakdown of American society.
And I wouldn't call it really a breakdown of American society, and many societies go through these challenges, and here...
Civility, let's say, not American society.
Exactly.
Civility.
And here in China, so long as we are mindful that we have a lot of achievements, we have a lot of things to celebrate, but nevertheless, we are still a middle-income level country. We should do everything needed. Eschew this pride, and sometimes you have to take some criticism with a good sense of humor, at least, and bear in mind that we must do everything to escape what's called the middle-income trap. And that's so critically important. If China cannot make that, we'll be in big trouble.
We're going to have to leave it there, though. We're running out of time. Thank you very much, Professor John Einar-Tengen, and also Mr. Fraser Cameron joining us via satellite from Tokyo. That does it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.